Welcome to the Nightbird Radio Podcast. I'm Timothy Saylor, and I'm going to be your host this evening as we sound out the subconscious, navigate the nocturnal, and explore the farthest reaches of our experience. Coming at you from the back of an 86 Dodge Ram van on the rolling foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains in the Great Forest, deep in the heart of the Kali Yuga. This is radio for the hauntological turn. This episode of the Nightbird Radio Podcast was brought to you by yours truly. If you'd like to support the show and hear your name or a cryptic message in lieu of your name read at the top of the show, go to nightbirdpodcast.com and navigate to the Support the Show page. Thank you so much for your generous support. And welcome back, Nightbirds. It's great to have you back, and it's great to be back. This week I was joined by Noah. Noah is like me, a seeker, a searcher, a nightbird. We explore political, biological, physical, and cosmological heresies of all shapes and sizes. We discuss the intersection of paranormal phenomena and psi. We talk about aliens, high strangeness, AI as a doorway, political power and the archetype of the hidden, the powers that manage the narrative of empire, conspiracy yoga, spooky presidents, alternative cosmologies, and so much more. We also offer our personal medicine for these times, our own ways out of the trap, if you will. But without further introduction, let's get to the conversation. Noah, welcome to the Nightbird Radio Podcast. How are you doing?
Thanks for having me. I've been looking forward to this. Really excited to chat with you.
Really glad to have you on. I know we always have really good conversations.
For sure.
Do we want to jump into what we were talking about? You know, before we do that, we were having a really good conversation before that we hit record, as is tradition. But before we get into some of that deeper, darker stuff, if you don't mind, I'd like to ask a little bit about yourself. What were you afraid of as a child?
Oh, that's a super interesting question. Believe it or not, I actually had a phobia of ghosts,
Nice.
which is kind of funny. Like, you know, ended up in the field that I'm in, like studying like animism and occultism and all these different things. And yeah, I was terrified of like unseen presences, and I don't even know where it came from. I can't recall like a childhood experience that like led to that. But I like slept with the light on, like it drove my parents nuts because like, you know, they didn't see any evidence of like any reason to be afraid, but like for years and years it was a big fear of mine.
And so your relationship to that now, as you hinted, is a little bit more shall we say nuanced or closer? What?
I think it really set the stage for a lot of stuff. And I actually, looking back on it, I kind of wonder if I was actually picking up on something. And like, it obviously, it wasn't like big enough or powerful enough to like move objects around, like not like a classic like haunting or anything like that. But kind of wonder if I was like picking up on something that like my culture really couldn't explain. And kind of like looking back on it, like there definitely seemed to be certain patterns to it, like certain regions of the house were worse than others. And I don't really would know why that would be, but it definitely like sticks out to me looking back on it now. So I think there was maybe like something to it, but it was probably mixed with a lot of just like irrational fear about, you know, encountering something that you can't see and can't really understand.
The reason I ask that, and it's been a great, like, just that question alone, I got off of it for a couple episodes I forgot to ask, and I'm really kicking myself for it because it always illuminates for me a little bit, because I find that, okay, so I was really afraid of aliens, and I was afraid of ghosts too. I was really afraid of everything when I was a kid. But I was terrified of that stuff, but I was also like just obsessed with it. And I'm still now obsessed with it, but I have a different relationship. And it's almost as if, just from asking this question, it seems like what we're afraid of as kids plays a really big part in what we're fascinated by later on. And maybe sometimes it stays a fear because that fails to be integrated or what have you. Everyone's different. But yeah, I'm always interested to hear about that.
Yeah, I feel like if I had seen like a full body apparition as a kid, I probably would have just like been traumatized forever. But I feel like if I saw one now, I would actually be like able to deal with it. Um, and it actually wasn't until years later that I actually had something happen. Like, I'm not sure how many details I can share because it was at somebody else's house, and there was like some connections to powerful people involved, which is really strange. But I saw an object moved on its own. And what was weird about it to me was I wasn't scared when it happened. Like I watched this object move, and as far as I could tell, like I interpreted it at the time as a reminder that I had to do something, that I had to take care of something on the property that I was staying at. And then it really hit me later how strange it was. So like the first time I actually saw something like very high strangeness, like I it didn't really even compute for me, honestly. And I've heard that's a really common thing where like people will have like extreme paranormal experiences and then forget about them, even though they're extremely powerful.
Right. Or like just go back to sleep. I think
Mhm.
Young talks about that some. I can't be sure. I can't remember. Um, so that brings me to another interesting thought. When I think about ghosts, and you mentioned somewhat the psi portion of that, I think there's like an intersection there with psi abilities, synchronicity, and then also actual spirits, right? So like
Mhm.
what happens a lot of the time is that people are like grasping for these explanations that are almost way more ridiculous than just the actual answer that there are spirits. But I
Yeah.
think that some of those explanations do explore fertile territory. And so I think it's like this combination of all of those things, right? What do you think about that?
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's a really good take, and that's really close to my take too. Because I actually, I'll be honest, like I kind of dismissed a lot of like UFO stuff and kind of extraterrestrial hypothesis stuff when I was younger because it didn't seem to like say anything about reality to me. Because I was looking at the like the way it was like interpreted in pop culture, and it's like these are beings that are like basically just like us, only like better at manipulating matter, and then they come here and I don't know, like pick people up and drop them off. And I didn't really find that like satisfying because it like it didn't enrich reality for me. Like even if that was happening, it was just like this is just like a kind of like it felt like partially a fantasy of our own technology versus like something really profound. And then I looked into it further, and you pull at any one of these threads, like you pull up the UFO thread, even like Sasquatch, and like you end up in high strange territory immediately. Like you end up with like psi, you end up with ghosts, like these kind of things on the periphery of like official reality all seem to be like related somehow. And like it's really hard to have like one explanation that covers all phenomenon.
Yeah, you end up jumping um, into the whole vast array of those things pretty quickly, which is what I love about it.
Mhm.
Um, oh, I had something and then I lost it. So yeah, like that's interesting. You're talking about the idea of nuts and bolts craft, and nuts and bolts aliens not enriching reality. It is almost like a almost a brash assumption, right? That like we could encounter something like that and still retain our paradigm or still retain our way of seeing the world, like that wouldn't totally shatter it. And so that's why I'm kind of interested with all this AI stuff that's happening. I find it fascinating as well as terrifying, right?
Mhm.
But I think I was talking to my brother about that. There's an article going on around right now about the lobe, this being this
Oh.
woman that shows up in, and you know, I can link the article in the show notes if anyone wants to read that. But to what the conclusion that I reached in this conversation with my brother was like that's alien contact.
Mhm.
That's alien contact. It's not going to be this, and I almost think that there's a like a psyop in the, well, obviously, right, but like there's a
Yep.
psyop in that that like Close Encounters of the Third Kind sort of deal, right?
Yeah, yeah. I think that because it almost like continues the project of, and maybe that's a bold statement of me to say that doesn't enrich reality to have nuts and bolts aliens coming down and be like, "Oh, here's our faster than light device or
But it doesn't,
whatever."
because
Like,
like they're just acting as like a intergalactic taxi service that just like
yep.
picks people up one place and drops them off in another.
Yeah, yeah. It's like their time is missing or something, and like and I don't know. It just seems like to continue the project of that like managerial, like, if you give enough money to us, we'll eventually invent something like this, and we'll be the extraterrestrials flying off to other planets, and that's cool. But yeah, I'm more interested in the stuff that kind of like suggests like a deeper reality to it. And as far as like AI goes, I think you're right. Like I think that AI is I don't think based on like my understandings, like I don't think a consciousness could be constructed in any way. Like I don't think you can put enough Lego pieces together to like make a person. Like I think there's more involved in it than that. But it seems to me like AI or like whatever these systems are that are like these like machine learning or like what is it, like neural networks, have like a doorway in them that could lead to some interesting things. And I think that's the value of like AI, like quote unquote art for me, is it like it kind of shows the collective unconscious in a way that's never been seen before. Because it's like learning from all of these different pieces of art, and the AI couldn't exist unless all these different pieces of art did, and then it's like kind of showing a like archetype of some kind, and that's what I find interesting about it. But yeah, I think there is a door in there.
I think it's a door in the same way that a statue can be a door. Like it's a vessel that's easily inspirited because it
Hmm.
has um like it's in some way anthropomorphized, right? Because no matter how you dice it, it's a product of humans. And so it's by in a way an extension rather than some kind of a new creation, right? Just like I see cars this way. This is like my animism of cars. Um, like or any tool, right? As a, like if, it's easy to picture a hammer as an extension of the arm,
Hmm.
but then also has the ability to be inspirited
Hmm.
because of its humanity. So you're getting like, and this is maybe a bad um analogy, but you're getting like 90% of the way, and all you need is that 10%, and something can just
Hmm.
jump in and fill it.
Yeah, and there's definitely like I think um a lot of possibility for seeing how the other side like interacts with humans when we work with these technologies. Kind of like where did the ideas for these things come from, and like are human purposes the only ones involved? I
Oh
think that's
yeah.
a really interesting question. And I forgot his name. I think Kerry Mullis, the inventor of the PCR test. I think if I remember correctly, he like came up with the idea, or it was given to him when he was like tripping on acid, and it was like downloaded into his head when he was sitting in a car, and he wrote it down. And like given how significant that test has ended up being, like that's a really interesting kind of intersection of these things.
Well, and his take on it was that it shows you that there's everything exists within everything, and that you can find.
A
He's
very
like,
hermetic like
yeah,
insight.
yeah, it's really cool. Yeah, no, that's a good point too. Let's talk about that a little bit. The the other designs that might go into this technology, because I think that's really important and not to be brushed over.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think I I should probably like it's been a while since I've read about this, but I think of like Jack Parsons, who was like a dyed in the wool occultist, who I think he knew Aleister Crowley, if I'm not mistaken, and he was like the main force behind the Jet Propulsion Labs, until he like literally blew himself up. Um, and so you have people, and like, NASA was, it probably still is, like crawling with like very strange characters. So it seems to be that when you like reach the limits of these technology, like the cutting edge, there seems to be like some other hands in the mix in ways that's like hard to understand, like whose motives are what and like where it's coming from.
Yeah, it makes me think of actually, and I just think a lot of things make me think of this, but it's the same with the intelligence community, right?
Hmm.
And it has me wondering, like, because there's a lot of people that are kind of in both the occult circles and the intelligence community. Like, there's always a big overlap with that. Like, Aleister Crowley is a good example, but there's others. Um, and it makes you wonder, like, what are these spirits up to?
Yeah. Well, it's almost like, you follow these fields enough, and like you end up bumping up against intelligence agencies and intelligence communities. It's like almost like it's like, I guess the way I have to understand it, because it like scares me a bit, right? I'm like, oh, the stuff that I'm interested in kind of like bumps me into the CIA and whatever the heck they're up to, like more often than I'm comfortable with.
Right.
And I kind of wonder. I think about it as is in terms of like the sign Scorpio, like the astrological sign. It's like the sign of hidden things, and I kind of wonder if it's like the archetypal relationship between like the hidden forces of the world, which are like studied by occultists, and also like political power. Like they're kind of like one and the same. They're both like hidden forces operating in the world that affect consciousness.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. Nightbirds. I hope you've been enjoying the conversation so far, and there's more to come. But first, I have to ask that you support the show. As I'm sure you've noticed, there are no commercials on this show. There are no paywalls. You get everything up front. For there to be free dialogue here, I think it must remain uncaged by the interests of advertisers. But Nightbird Radio does cost time and money to make, and your support means I can spend less time delivering pizza and more time doing this. That's a win-win. So that's why Nightbird Radio is a value for value podcast. I hope you found value in this show, but I can't and won't dictate just how much. Only you can decide that. But what I can do is invite you to take that value, turn it into a number, and head to www.nightbirdpodcast.com and hit the donate button located on the front page to offer your support. We're also listed on podcastindex.org, which means you are able to send Bitcoin via the Lightning Network using your favorite Podcasting 2.0 apps, which can be found at newpodcastapps.com. And finally, I also accept dry goods. Email me at tim@nightbirdpodcast.com for more information. Sponsors will get a special mention on the show. Thank you for your generous support. Now let's get back to the conversation.
And I think with like the CIA or like the NSA, like these forces, like influence history usually outside of the spotlight. Like, I think a really good example is Miles Copeland Jr. was a former CIA agent, and he wrote about like the historians writing about Egypt in the 50s. And he said these historians don't get it. Like we meaning the CIA were in Egypt, and we were manipulating those events. And they write the history as if there was no impact from intelligence agencies and it was entirely organic. And I think about that a lot because I think it applies to like a lot of different. It's not just Egypt. It's like a lot of different countries and historical scenarios.
Yeah, and what like to me it's a bit naive to imagine that the intelligence apparatus of an empire wouldn't be instrumental in managing that empire's narrative. Like that's who you would get to do it.
Hmm.
Like,
Yeah, I heard an analogy where it was like the two-dimensional plane is like the world as presented by like media, and then the three-dimensional object that plane intersects is the like activities of intelligence agencies. And I thought that was just perfect.
Yeah, that's really good. Like the whole flatland thing.
Hmm.
Wow.
Yeah, and it goes into the unseen, like we were talking about earlier, like this kind of extra dimensionality of this stuff. And I think that political power is involved with that too. And it kind of even shows up in myths, like the wizard is always next to the king. Like you have Merlin and Gandalf, and like these characters are like very involved with political power.
Yeah. Gilgamesh comes to mind, right?
I'm not too familiar with Gilgamesh. Is that like they're um
Yeah, I think there's that trope exists in that myth too.
dang, gets old.
Yeah. So in I probably don't know enough to say for sure, but like in the Sumerian and Chaldean um traditions, from what I've read, that is like the business of the king, is like magic is king business. And
Hmm.
you can see that in Egypt too.
Oh, for
Like,
sure.
and then that kind of over time, you can see that getting diffused down into the other classes to to where we are now, and it's almost pervasive, which gets us into an interesting topic that we were discussing before we hit record, which would be the illusion of readily available information versus the reality of what's actually
Oh,
available.
oh yeah, this is one of my favorite topics because like when you talk about like conspiracy type stuff with people or like, you bark up that tree, their first reaction is like, "Oh, if this happened, someone would have leaked it and I would have heard about it." And I thought about that for a while, and it seems like it's this very and I, what it seems to me is it's like a very naive view of reality. Like you're basically saying that you have enough understanding and trust in the channels of information that all information about extremely important events or sometimes unimportant events that are hidden would be provided to you. And the question I always want to ask somebody when they say that is, what did the CIA do last year? Does anyone know? Like I don't know. And there's so many things that like just in my like I'm not anybody important. Like I just like I read books and I'm just kind of on the sidelines, doing my thing. But I've kind of like brushed up shoulders with some interesting like events, and I've seen I obviously can't go into details, but like I've seen things happen that should have been news stories that weren't, and were totally brushed under the rug and completely disappeared. Um, and like I imagine that scales up at all levels and all locations. Like there's so much stuff going on in the world, there's so many like different conspiracies bumping up into each other that it's like how would anyone have access to all that information? And in terms of like people leaking it, like I'm sure like important information leaks all the time. It just like doesn't go through the channels. Like I feel like people have this like because we have this mythos that we're like a democracy and like we have journalists that go and get the truth for us and that kind of thing. But because like when I was like I used to be very like progressive, I used to think all of the progressive stuff, but that kind of um a lot of life experiences took that away from me. And one of the things I thought when I was a progressive was like the news media and journalists are like, basically good. They want to get the truth and they want to bring it to people. There might be like bias towards sensationalism, but like basically that's what the world is. And I've totally shifted on that. Like I don't think it's transparent like that at all. I think it's you're dealing with entities that or like maybe not entities, maybe in the supernatural sense, maybe not, but you're dealing with these organizations or this a class of people that is like at best indifferent to their interests, but like at best indifferent to your interests, but they're using the news media to further their own interests instead of like this very idealistic view of like, getting truth and bringing it to the people. It's their organizations designed to further the interests of an aristocracy. And maybe I didn't phrase that too well, but yeah, like there's a big difference between a world in which this information is transparent to you, like you read a news story and it's just kind of organically what the truth is being brought to you, versus like this is an organization with an agenda run by people who do not share my interests. Like that's a very big difference in like worldview.
Yeah, and of course the audio kind of dropped out a little bit during the last part of what you were saying, which is about part of the
Interesting.
course.
Right. Yeah, it's there's sometimes you get those winks on stuff.
Yes.
But yeah, like, and I think it's the same thing with social media. Like the way social media is sold, like a Twitter or a Facebook or all these things, it's sold as like this is just like random people like posting what they actually think. And maybe that's a good part of it, but I think everyone at this point knows about like troll farms and like influencing, like whether domestic or foreign, like all of these organizations that are paid to post on social media, like a lot of it isn't organic.
In bot
Um,
swarms.
yep.
Yeah, like who, right. Like I think a lot of the time the conception is that like, oh, this is just a bunch of basement dwellers doing this, but like, okay, yeah, maybe some of it, but who's the one with the real motivation to do this kind of stuff? It's not that difficult of a question to answer, you know?
Yeah.
Um,
And oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
One of
I'm
the
going to
things
ask
I
you a
picked up
question
from,
once you're finished with this thought, though.
oh, for sure. Yeah. One of the things I picked up from Michael Parenti, who is like I guess he was a leftist philosopher from early 90s. I think that's the description. But when he talks about the ruling class, like he says that they don't care about your well-being. Like they don't care if you're happy or healthy, but they do care about what you think. And that insight really stuck with me because that seems to be an accurate analysis.
Yeah, I think that's actually incredibly, like what we think is incredibly important on an energetic level and a real, very real level. I mean, well, energy is real, but you know what I mean, on a mundane level. Um, okay, I had a question, but now you got me thinking in another direction. So this is one of those things that's hard for me to see some sort of um a whoopsie behind, right? So
Hmm.
the fact that the mainstream worldview has um gone so far towards materialism, it supports this what you're saying here, the ability to kind of control what people think. I feel that it makes people much more easier to manipulate. It makes their thinking easier to manipulate because you're going back to a top down distribution of knowledge.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's totally it. And like the materialist worldview, like as a metaphysics, almost like lends itself to like manipulation by political power, like you said. Like if you have an understanding of the human being as this biological robot that just kind of emerges out of the mud, and exists for no reason, um, and is basically like a blank slate, just like a plaything for anybody with enough skill to manipulate it. Like that's really good at that's a really good world people view for like selling people prescription drugs.
Yes.
It's like, yep, you're a biological robot and your oil's low, so here's your subscription.
Yeah. Here's your update.
Hmm.
And
And
I've seen that language being used.
yeah,
Update.
like the yeah, get your update, get your updated shots, get your updated like yeah,
Like
it's definitely
your
sorry.
program. No, no, no. I'm agreeing. And so that's like people, and it's like, oh, that's just that's just what they're how they're saying it. That's just a metaphor, but no, there's so much more to the way we say things and to the way we think about things
And
that
it's a lot. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
from well, yeah, someone with a magical worldview can see that the importance of the phrasing and the importance of the use of metaphor and the importance of the story that's being told. Whereas, and I'm speaking from experience, when I had a more materialist, because I was pretty like I had gone into a pretty like a pendulum swing away from religion into just straight up atheist materialism where this is all for nothing. And I was never more afraid in my life, but also um I believed that this was it. And so there was no life before and there was no life after. And it just made me incredibly visceral, which led me to hitting rock bottom. And like, gratefully, with gratitude, I'm here now, but um, definitely not to like talk down on someone that's there, but I think that it's a worldview that's been imposed on us with malicious intent.
Absolutely. And the people, and I don't want to name names because like I'm not too sure on my sources on this, but I've heard um that major players in the like skeptic movement were tied to like specifically naval intelligence. Um and like so there's definitely agenda at play here to like push this stuff and like where the money was coming from. And like I said, I don't want to name names, but like some of the really big people in the like very like skeptical, rational, like materialist, whatever you want to call it, like worldview, were definitely, or as far as I can tell, very connected to the powers that be. And it's also interesting that the powers that be, that in public, will toe the line of materialist thinking, like don't seem to believe it themselves. Like I think it's fairly well known that like the Queen of England is very interested in homeopathy, and some of these like very wealthy families have like enormous collections of Sumerian artifacts that have never seen the light of day. Like I think 90% of the Sumerian artifacts are held outside in museums in private hands.
Yeah, I'm a totally a the Iraq War was for Stargates guy, so I dig that.
I could totally see that because there's like pictures of like US troops doing stuff in ziggurats. Like
Yeah.
the I was like I don't know what they were doing in there, but like it obviously wasn't just like hanging out.
Yeah, there's some pretty interesting commentary on that. It gets pretty like pretty deeply in the weird pretty quick, but that's my bread and butter, so it's just hey, good.
Yeah, me too. I try to like because there's a kind of balance you have to have of like kind of knowing that this stuff is out there and like but when you try and like actually untie the Gordian knot, like there's so much disinformation that it's hard to get to the core of what's happening. But so you just have to kind of like pick out these little like threads of things and be like, here are the implications, but we kind of don't really know much more than that.
I have to be on a swivel about it. Um and it actually is a I find to be quite a mind expanding exercise to be able to entertain all these strange possibilities, um, but not to get lost in the rabbit hole. It's almost
Hmm.
like it is like a sort of, like I said, it's consciousness expanding in a way. And I think as an animist, um, the implications there are even weirder, right? Because all these stories are like living threads that weave their
Hmm.
way through, right? So like these, even if like an idea is um maybe a bit more fantastical, that doesn't preclude its reality, that there's a reason why that's being said, there's a reason why that thread is being woven through the discourse.
Absolutely. And we were just talking about this before the show started about like being open to possibilities. And because I feel like you kind of need to be able to expand your mind into that kind of what if realm. Like I actually decided at one, like I spent just one day on this, but I actually decided to look into the flat earth stuff. I was like,
Nice.
okay, what are they saying? I was like, because like that's one of those things where it's like you're not supposed to look here because they're completely nuts. And like nothing they say matters. And I was like, okay, well, sounds like they might have something interesting to say. So I looked into it, and the flat earth stuff is I don't see any definitive evidence that the earth is flat. Like I don't think they really have anything on that. But one of the things I did pick up from them, and well, I guess before I did that, I was like, okay, what would it mean to live on a flat earth? Like would it mean if the earth was flat and these people were right? And NASA was lying about everything, and like we had been given this story that is false, and like I tried to like inhabit that world for a bit, and then I like came out of it and I'm like, this doesn't really work for me. Like I don't think the arguments for it are that strong. But what I took out of it, of that experience, was they seem to be right that NASA lies about stuff.
Yeah,
I
I
don't
think
know.
so too.
Yeah, like they actually had some good stuff on that. And so like this experience for me of like going into this like absolutely like derided movement, like you like nothing they say matters, like don't listen to these people at all. Like I was like, okay, maybe there is something valuable in there, and I went in and I took something valuable out of it for myself. Like you like stretch into that position and then like retract.
So here's the darkest timeline. And let me ask you this. So, do you think it's possible that instead of these things being hidden or covered, or you're told not to look here, don't look here, isn't so much to hide the information behind the conspiracy or the conclusion of the conspiracy, but it is to keep you from thinking critically. It is to keep
I
you from questioning your reality. And
I
that
think
is a
that is
much darker timeline.
I think that's totally it. And I think people often underestimate how much practice intelligence agencies have at doing these, like manipulating the mind. Like they have decades of research into this, a pretty much unlimited budget. Um, and like, if you live outside the United States, it's very clear that the US military and its intelligence apparatuses are extremely dangerous. Like if you live in Syria, like you've watched your country get blown up, or Vietnam, or like all these other places, like being on the receiving end of that like apparatus in a very like direct way makes it very clear how dangerous it is. And um I think they're very, very good at like fomenting revolts. They're very, very good at like manipulating the political process. But one of the things I think they do is I think they do this all the time. It's a discredit by association.
Oh yeah.
Um, so you like using the flat Earth example, like you can't look into anything that NASA might be lying about, because that puts you in the same camp as the flat earthers, and you can't do that. Like that's low status. You can't go there at all. So I think that's something they use very frequently.
They do it with the UFO stuff too. And one of the most interesting ones, I think, is that there seems to be evidence in the method that this is like kind of what Trump is too, right? Because the things that Trump rails against are actually like a lot of valid ideas, right? Like fake news. But you can no
Mm-hmm.
longer look and say news is fake without being a Trumper.
Yep.
Um, the deep state. You can't say deep state without being a crazy Trumper. These
Mm-hmm.
ideas that are very valid are now, by association with Donald Trump, off limits.
Yep.
That's concerning to
I
me.
Me too. And I have a tidbit to share on that too. So like I said, I was raised in a very like progressive family. I live in a very like progressive Midwestern city, and my father was like the it still is like the most progressive you can get. Listens to all progressive news sources, all this stuff. And he used to talk to me about politics growing up. So I was basically like, I grew up hearing about what the Bush administration was doing, which is I still think is horrific. And
Right.
but the stuff my dad was saying, he's like, oh, we should reconsider NAFTA. We should reconsider these trade agreements and all of this stuff. And it was really, really interesting for me to watch Trump in 2016 come out and say the exact same stuff that my very progressive father had been saying for years. And my father can't stand Trump, like thinks he's like evil incarnate.
Right.
But I don't think he noticed that Trump basically delegitimized a lot of the things that he felt very strongly about.
Yeah. It's a really concern. It's a very concerning sleight of hand. And that's a good way of seeing it, because it was it that I'm only just thinking about because of what you just said and of the context within this conversation, because I used to be like, well, where'd that flip come from? There was like a flip, but
Mm-hmm.
maybe it's not so much of a flip as it is like a sleight of hand misdirection, a shell game.
For sure. And I think like you can actually see this in the Obama administration too. So like one of the big like don't consider this at all was like the birther movement. Like, where's the birth certificate? He was born in Kenya. Like, I think all that's nonsense. Like, I don't think he was born in Kenya, but because of that movement, you cannot look into as far as I'm concerned, the very likely possibility that Obama came from a long CIA background. Like he wasn't this organic politician that came up out of nowhere, and that he was linked to intelligence agencies from a very young age.
Oh yeah, I think he was definitely like groomed as a CIA president. This is like one of my favorite conspiracies, actually.
Yeah, if you look at like what
He's
his
like the
mom was.
Kwisatz Haderach of the CIA.
Yeah, exactly. It was like you look at what his mom was doing in Indonesia, and like, trying to get like these Indonesian villagers on the team of like global finance, and like she was there at the exact same time that like the United States was organizing a coup against the Indonesian government. And I'm like, if that doesn't scream CIA, like I don't know what does.
Yeah, she was working for like one of those CIA fronts.
Hmm.
Yeah, there's a really good article about this. We cross paths on this article because I was actually looking for it and you pulled it up for me. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's just like, and right. And so because of the birther stuff, it acts as a smokescreen because you can't question it at all. But I
hmm
think in general, this sort of division, um, it's really a great schism that's happening in America. And I think it at some point and I don't know when this happened, but at some point it picked up enough steam to where no matter what it is you say, it's making the other side dig their heels in. And
hmm
so it just further it's like once something that's being torn, the gravity is now able to just carry that tear down the whole of the whatever, the cloth or whatever. You know what I mean? Like that
hmm
curtain that's being torn, like when that it just there's like a no turning back point.
Yeah, I feel that too, and it scares me a lot because like as far as what I think, like I don't think this tear gets like fixed. I think it just kind of continues going until like whatever, because what it seems to me is that the two sides, or if there might be more sides, I don't know, but like what the two main sides like can't agree on is how to use this massive government we have. Like it's this tug of war of who gets to use this enormous like state apparatus and for what purposes. And so I think the only answer to that kind of polarization is you just don't share that government anymore. Like I
Yeah.
don't see another way out. However, smoothly or not smoothly that happens.
And I think it is a matter of like warring factions, but I think that people would be really surprised to find out who is actually on the same faction. You know, like
Yeah.
there's so much like that whole red and blue thing is just a total.
Sci-hub. Yep.
Yeah, man, it's a two-man grift,
Yep.
classic grift.
Make you
And
choose between two lies.
yeah, right. and just like the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. Wink, wink.
Yep. I can't help but thinking there's almost like a karmic thing, like a national karma thing involved, because like I remember in 2020, and like I don't have any basis for this. This is just like a feeling that I had at the time. So like you can like however people want to take this, but like I remember the very like tense um like time around the George Floyd protests, and like I know there's a lot involved with that. Like there's a lot of very important issues that were brought up around like state violence and that kind of thing. But I could not shake the feeling. I was like, oh my God, this is what it feels like when the CIA topples your government. Um, like, because I remember I had a TA when I was in college who was from El Salvador, and he was there during the time that both the Soviet Union and the United States were funding like different groups in the country to fight each other. And so he said that they got so used to the gunfire that they would like him and his grandma would just sit and watch TV as the bullets flew in the background. And they weren't even trying to hit anybody, like they're just shooting into the air so the Soviet Union and the United States would send more money to keep the conflict going.
Wow.
And I think about that and like how many other countries has that happened in? Um, and so like the manipulation of like, movements in a country by intelligence agencies to further the goals of empire is like a very, very old tactic of American intelligence agencies.
I think it's probably a very old tactic of intelligence agencies in general. And I think it's
Mm.
pretty it's another one of those arrogant stances to think that like, oh well, we do this everywhere else, but we don't do that here. Well, like it's
Yeah,
just a matter of time. Like you're just the last place where it's done. like, you know, like the
that
home country is just the last place where it happens.
Yeah, and this is actually something else I want to talk about too. Like, growing up, like I have a very like middle class background. Like we weren't extremely wealthy, but I never wanted for anything. Like we had very comfortably materially. And everyone at that level that I grew up with just kind of thinks that our politicians are like buffoons, like they're all stupid and they just like don't know what they're doing. They're just kind of like stumbling around in the dark, and like Congress is full of idiots, which sure, but like I can't help but think how different that would look if you lived in Iraq, or you lived in Syria, or you lived in Libya, or one of these countries, or anywhere in South America, pretty much. Um, like, do those like you live in Peru and the DEA comes in and like sets fire to your coca plants? I think they still do that. I think that was a big thing in Peru, but like, does that look like the action of a bumbling fool? Like that, does that look like somebody that doesn't have a plan of some kind? Like, even if the plan goes belly up halfway through, like, does that look like somebody acting without intent? Like, I certainly
Right.
don't think so.
It more looks like the act of a rival. So like just a
Mhm.
rival drug dealer.
Yep. Yep. Rival like cartel. And like speaking of like the kind of, you know, line of information, like one of the stories I remember hearing was this was a CIA agent who everything's on a need to know basis, like, basically nobody has the whole operation, but he was flying in a plane for like the drop things off in Cuba, and after the like communists took over in Cuba, and I think he accidentally like broke open a box that they were supposed to put in Cuba, and ticks came out, and one of the ticks ended up biting him, and I think that that experience led to him sharing the poison or the disease or whatever these ticks were carrying with his wife and children. And this is what they were going to drop on Cuba, and he was the only person that leaked that story. Like, the only reason that we know about that operation was because this one guy spoke up. And it was even an accident that he kind of got the whole picture of the operation altogether, just because he got like literally bit by it. um I gotta I'm reporting that from memory. I don't actually.
No, I remember this. I remember hearing
Yeah.
about this. Not like necessarily the details, but that's an interesting point. Um, about not seeing the whole picture until you get bit by it.
Hmm.
It
Hmm.
seems to be one of those ways in which I want to use a good like a Lord of the Rings reference, right? One of the ways in which the will of Iluvatar comes through out of the greatest evil, how good is born out of that, right?
Hmm.
Because there's some point where getting bit by it wakes me up.
Hmm.
And that had to happen to me too. It happened to me in a lot of different places. It happened to me with drugs and alcohol, and it happened to me in this sort of thinking, because I was basically always just repeating what everyone else around me was saying. I was like just a node in this game of telephone. And I never thought um about what it is I was actually saying or espousing. It was just like who has the most influence on my life, and I'm just going to repeat what they say. And that's just, probably just like a one of the lessons of this life for me that I've had to overcome. But I wouldn't have ever come out of that if I hadn't somewhere been bitten by it, whatever it is. Do you want to get in on the conversation? I've teamed up with Numinauts to offer you the opportunity to do just that. For only $1 a month, you'll get access to Numinauts.club, a Mastodon server for animists and artists that brings together the Nightbird radio and Soapbox podcast communities. Just click the link that I've provided in the show description to get started. Now let's get back to the conversation.
And that's a great metaphor because, like, I had a similar experience along these lines. Like, my family was one of the many that was nearly destroyed by the financial collapse in 2008. And I remember that very clearly. Like, I was like, oh my God, like these people who I don't know, who are doing all of this stuff and have been for years, like, messing with the markets and all this other kind of stuff, like brought down my family. Um, I never did anything to them. I have no impact on them. They don't know I exist, but like the movements that they make have an impact on me. And that happened to me when I was pretty young. And that experience was like, has stayed with me.
Yeah, if I could share too. So this one actually is interesting because it intertwines like all this stuff. Um, but one of the ways I got bit early on, and I'm so grateful for this now, even though it caused me a lot of hardship and a lot of difficulty. It's all been instrumental in bringing me to where I am at this moment. But I was prescribed, um, you know, strong speed in about first grade, and we know there's different names for these drugs, and there's different brands, and there's different formulas. But in my case, it was Ritalin and then Adderall, and these are amphetamines.
Mhm.
They're amphet salts, whatever. It's a pretty arbitrary distinction, but in my case, that set the stage for like a really long and torrid love affair with stimulants. That was my shit, man. Uh and it brought me on my knees eventually, you know what I mean? But it took me a long time before being able to see this monster for what it was, which was the pharmaceutical industry just being able to sell with impunity these type of drugs to parents. And now it's even worse, right? Because if you watch TV, which you cross yourself before you do,
Yes.
like, dude, all the commercials are about drugs, and it's all these weird uh syndromes that are probably caused by the other drugs. Anyway, that's a tangent, but anyway,
It's
so
a good one though.
and we'll
Sorry,
get
go
into
ahead.
it because I think it's a continuation of some of these ops, some of these. But so for me, I wouldn't have been able to see what's going on now if that hadn't happened to me then, and it's put a distrust for pharmaceutical companies that it's been ingrained in me, and thank God for that, because I can see,
Hmm.
because it bit me.
Yeah, I totally hear you. And given the last couple years, and I think like when I try to talk to people about this who haven't been bit by it or haven't admitted that they've been bit by it, um, they seem to think it's like, oh, like these, I don't know. The reaction I seem to get is like, oh, why are they suddenly the bad guys? Like it's like these doctors and nurses, and my brother is a doctor, this kind of thing. Like they've been trying to help us. And I'm not saying that everybody in the industry is like a bad person. That's not the case. But like the industry itself has a long history of harming people for power and profit. Um, and that goes back many, many years. Like you can look at even the opium wars. And I actually found it really valuable of like being able to like show this history that like Britain, like for example, like Britain was fighting the Chinese government at the time to continue selling opium in China to both pacify the population and also make a boatload of money. Um, and that happened 200 years ago, 200 something years ago. So this stuff has been going on a long, long time. And
And
yeah,
that very thing is just happening. It's just it's happening on different fronts now. You know,
yeah.
there's an
And they
opium
have,
war being waged on the population of America by at least, I can't say for sure like state or corporation, but at least one of each.
yep, yep. And
Right.
it's like, I don't know. It's just like life in the modern United States. Like who's coming after us now? Is it our government? Is it the pharmaceutical companies? Is it a foreign government? Is it all three? Like it's
Is it
just like,
a corporation run amok? It's very
hmm,
much like this. It's very without trying to get too negative on it. It's more dystopian, I think, than people will see, and I think it's
hmm.
actually more post-apocalyptic than people will see as well. But that's a whole nother.
Oh, that is something else I want to talk about too. Like you're hitting all my notes here.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, because like you grow up in the United States and you hear about like the two big things you hear about are like competing systems or whatever, or you hear about Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. And you look at those two systems, like these were totalitarian systems, like nobody had any freedom. Whereas we in the United States have freedom and like we can choose what news sources we want, or like all of this stuff. Like we're something like fundamentally different than either of those two other like systems. And I think one of the big things for me in like my own journey, like and how I relate to like political power is like we're actually not that different. Um, we are just as, if not more dangerous than the governments of Nazi Germany or the Soviet Union. Like we in the United States, we have more people incarcerated than anyone else in the world. Um, and I think what makes it hard to see that is like the American empire is so big and so rich and so powerful, like probably more powerful and rich than any other empire in history, arguably. Like it's so big and so loud that it's like hard to see that there's anything outside of it. Um,
and they've got great PR. Well, they have
yes,
up until recently, and that's just what culture is. It's just the PR of an empire.
for sure. I've taken to calling our news media state media because I really think that it is. And like people will call it like the corporate media or like just the liberal media or like pick your kind of label. But the reason I say state media is because that's the one thing that in the United States we're told that we do not have a state media. Like our media is all these independent organizations that just try and like do their own thing, and I don't think that's the case at all.
Yeah, and there's way more jumping back and forth between those two than people think. For instance, just like people getting political positions, and then when those positions or appointments run up, going to work for these corporations, and then just doing that over and over again, right?
Yep.
And you can see that's not hidden. That's just out for everyone to see. But it's just, oh, of course you would do that. You know what I mean? Why wouldn't you? Right? Like, um,
I just
go ahead.
Oh, I was just reading an article about how a lot of like Facebook's content moderators are quote unquote ex CIA officers.
Yeah,
Like
but
there's a revolving.
there's no ex CIA officers.
Yeah, exactly. Like you got like Anderson Cooper. He's like, oh yeah, he like interned at the CIA and went to Vietnam, and then he decided to work in news or something. I'm like, did he stop working for the CIA? Like, what year was that?
Yeah, that's a pretty common trick, I think.
Yeah, sorry. Continue though. You had yeah.
Oh, I don't know what it was. It was I actually, funny enough, wanted to go back to flat Earth because I think one of the things is, and this is my trying to go positive a little bit on it, because one thing I do want to talk about as well is like what can be done in the face of all this, because it can be very harrowing for people.
Mhm.
Um, and I don't neglect other disciplines and hygienes, and that's why I'm able to do this stuff to think about this stuff without losing my mind. But
Mhm.
as a sort of segue to that, one of the things that I think is interesting about the flat Earth stuff is that I think one of those underlying truths that's being obfuscated by the psyop is the fact that this place is not what we think it is, or there's more to it than what we are allowed to know.
Yeah, I think that's totally it because part of the reason I looked into flat Earth is I don't feel satisfied with the explanation of like official cosmology. And we're hitting all the heresies here, right? Like
Oh
political,
yeah,
biological, like biology, physics, like all of this stuff. So like let's do cosmology.
dude, let's do
Uh,
all of it. This is what we're here for. This is this podcast. I'm so glad that we're having this conversation. Continue.
yeah, me too. Like I'm not satisfied with the I don't know what the answer is, but I'm not satisfied with the rocks in space thing. Um like that's part of it, sure, but I don't know. It's just I don't feel comfortable with it. Like I feel like there's more going on in like the cosmos and with the stars and then that model really catches. And it seems like there's something missing from that picture. Like it seems misdescribed to me. And like I'm not gonna go from that to say like I totally know the answer because I don't. I have some suspicions, but and like I definitely think there are other worlds out there, like there, are other systems and that kind of thing. But yeah, I don't know. Like, do you have any good takes like on that? It's a really tough subject because you're going against like years of NASA knows everything kind of thing.
Yeah, this is one that makes you sound real crazy too.
Yeah,
This and like somehow evolution, because I kind of push back on that too. Like I'm a more morphogenetic fields guy,
me
but
too. Yeah,
yeah, and so okay, so yeah, I'm dissatisfied by the rocks in space thing too, because I think there's just too much that adds up too nicely. Like just the idea of an eclipse, we just had some eclipses, and just the idea that the moon is the perfect distance to where it actually does cover up the sun, like it's the same size in the sky as the sun, and is able to do that. Like that to me is like that's like I don't know, man. That's too good.
yeah. I
you
was.
know.
Oh, can I? So
Uh,
I can't fully endorse this because I don't know, and I have not. I've barely spent any time on it. But since we're going here, I want to bring it up. I just listened to a random podcast about Tycho Brahe's cosmology, and the cosmology that he put forth, which was the accepted cosmology in Europe for a number of years, like a couple hundred years ago, was a I'm gonna screw up this name, but a geo geoheliocentric model. So this is I fully accept that I'm going to sound crazy here, but that's fine by me. I love going to the far out places. So Tycho Brahe argued that the sun goes around the Earth and all the other planets go around the sun. And that the sun, that our solar system is a binary system with the two primary components being the sun and Mars. And I can send you some stuff on this that I found super interesting.
This is really cool. And I used to really dig Tycho Brahe in school, and I can't really remember why. I just remember like partially I just like the name.
Yeah, it's a cool name, and it means fortune, like Tyche or victory,
Oh,
like
nice. Yeah.
luck.
Yeah, I
He
named someone after him in one of my stories I was writing in college, actually, funny enough.
Oh, that's interesting. That's a good synchronicity. Like,
Yeah.
I'll definitely send you some stuff on this. But yeah, it's interesting because like in astronomy, we're like finding that all of the stars in our neighborhood, from what I hear, are binary systems. Because you have like Sirius A and Sirius B, and so like we're finding binary systems all over the place, but our system isn't binary. Um,
Hmm.
and Tycho Brahe basically said that it was, but I think where Tycho Brahe, where I've heard that he missed the calculation, is he had the Earth as immobile, but it's not. So it's his system wasn't perfect, but it seems to be, from what I hear, like the math adds up better than the Copernican model. And what this would also mean is that the stars are actually a lot closer than current cosmology suggests, because the way the distance of stars is calculated is based on the assumption that the Earth is traveling at very, very high speeds. And so if that changes, then the stars end up a lot closer than they were. And that seems more satisfying to me for some reason. Like I said,
Yeah.
I can't totally like plant my flag on this and be like, this is what's happening, because I don't know. But I thought that was another like tidbit, another like stretching into mind expanding and being like, what would this mean if this is true?
Especially since I do think there are nuts and bolts like aliens like
Yeah.
coming and going. So like it makes it make more sense. Um okay, that's really fascinating and I'm gonna have to like look into that. It makes
You're
me
like,
think
I
it
was.
makes me think of the serious stuff too. Like, you know what I'm talking about? Like there's this kind of like serious current in occultism that and the Dogon, I think, believed that like I think Sirius and Earth were once like part of the same binary system or something. I can't. Please do not quote me on this because I'm definitely grasping from just what I've heard. But there's some part of the mythology where it's like Sirius was once like bound in a very important way to our solar system.
Yeah, they I don't know too many of the details, but I do know that the CIA confiscated the anthropological research on the Dogon. Apparently that's like missing now because the CIA took it. I don't have a direct source in that right now,
See,
but
this
you just
brings
kind
us
of pick
back
up
to,
things.
and that brings us back to what we were talking about before we hit record about the like anything that has a don't, and we mentioned this in terms of flat earth, but I'm just going to reiterate it that everything that
Hmm.
has that finger point, it's a finger pointing at it that says don't look at it, but all I'm seeing is the finger pointing at it, right?
Yep. Yeah, same here. And what I have heard about the Dogon is of Western Africa is they knew that Sirius was a binary system, even though that cannot be determined from a visual
Right.
like assessment, which is really interesting. And that's one of those things where it's like, I don't know what the answer is, but it's going to be cool.
Yeah. Okay. So, and another part for me that the idea of the stars being closer, I like. I also am just kind of one of those like stars are alive people,
Hmm.
and as crazy as that sounds, it's hard to deny if you look at it a certain way. You know, they breathe, they have some sort of metabolism, they um, et cetera, et cetera. And I think we're just totally wrong about them,
Hmm.
about the very nature of stars in general. The idea that there's some sort of prolonged explosion is just really unsatisfying to me. Um,
Hmm. Me too.
but I also think that some of where this goes is this idea of scarcity and of scarce resources that I think, the earth might be bigger than they say it is, or something. Like there's something more going on because all of these narratives that are the commonly accepted mainstream narratives fit into this idea of like there's scarce resources, there's scarce room, there's going to be too many people, there's not enough, there's not enough, there's not enough. And I don't believe that to be
Hmm.
true in any measure of, like, I think there's an infinite energy within every little speck of reality that's just exploding with energy. I think the field stuff, and we can go into that, is very compelling when it comes to that sort of model. And I just don't believe in scarcity. I don't.
Well, it's funny that the people who like seem to be the most concerned about scarcity are the people who've had more than anybody else in history.
Yeah. What is that?
Yeah, like what's like you have this like billionaire talking about, oh, overpopulation, we're gonna use too many resources. I'm like, you're the guy with 8 houses. Like what?
Yes. Right. And so it's so, but that um totally fits into what I think is going on there, which is that scarcity, it that's where greed comes from. Like, they're one in this, like, that
Hmm.
scarcity mentality and greed kind of like are two sides of the same coin, and that they exist like as a result of, or with each other somehow. Because I think it's one of those concepts that's alien.
Hmm.
And we've talked about this before, trying to pinpoint like the moment that the alien that is Empire entered this world. Like, when did that happen, right?
Hmm.
I think that's sort of the same concept as Watiko. It's not, I don't think it's native to this world. I don't think it's native
Yeah,
to this reality, maybe. I think it's something from outside, and we can get into Gnosticism if we want, but I know that that's a conversation that we've had before, and so I just find it interesting that we come back to that.
for sure. And I think it ties back into both cosmology and like what you're saying about like a way out, like what is the way out of this like totally encompassing system. And I think with like the cosmology component is if you look at the current story of Empire, we have this kind of managerial, like we're going to manage everything perfectly using computers, and we're going to like control all these and track everything, and we're going to spread out to the stars and take that stuff too. um, like that story is really rooted in a cosmological understanding of who we are and where we are. And everybody learns about Copernicus and Kepler and Galileo in school. Like our self understanding is very much connected to what we think the universe is. And if it's just the rocks in space thing, like you're just going to give all of your power to the people who say like I'm the best person at manipulating rocks in space because that's all there is
Yes.
and that's all that matters. And so, and like what you're saying about the stars being alive, like I think that like that starts to be the way out, is like living in a different world, living in the actual world, maybe was a better way of phrasing it
Yes.
than living in this system. um and recognizing that the system is not the way things are, but rather a tool of power to maintain its own interests. And I was actually just reading about the the myth, I think, of the sword of Damocles. Um, and it so there was a rich man who had a number of servants, and he had a lot of power and everything. And one of his this is an ancient myth, so there's definitely that like kind of spin on it. But like I think one of the people under him was like, you have it so good, like have all of these resources and people waiting on you hand and foot. And and so the rich man was like, okay, like I'll create an experience for you that mirrors my experience. So he told his servants to wait on this guy hand and foot, gave him all of his stuff, like all of his toys, all of his food. And then the rich man hung a sword above his head, hanging by one hair, that so it could fall at any time. And the the man who was like using all of his servants and everything had to stay under this sword. And then the guy, I said, I can't enjoy any of this while this sword is hanging over my head. And then the rich man said, yeah, now you understand what it's like to be in power. Like, I don't think these people are happy at all. Like, I don't think they enjoy all the stuff that they have. I think it's that consuming, that like wanting more and more and more. Um, And this is a total like tangent going back to where we were earlier, but I wanted to mention
Please.
it. Um, yeah, you mentioned the moon and the eclipse of the Earth. Apparently, I'll get you the info on this, but apparently, like the orbits of each planet are like somehow all perfect multiples of the moon's orbit or something like that. I might be just making that up or like misinterpreting it, but like there's a central importance of the lunar in the Brahe model. There's like a central importance to the moon in that system, which I think will be really interesting to explore.
Well, I think that makes some more sense with astrology too. And so like yeah, that's very interesting as well. Like a science that takes all these other sciences into account and doesn't discredit them, because when you brush aside all this valuable data, you just end up with dumb shit like dark matter. But
Yeah, yeah.
like uh so yeah, but like in astrology, the idea of the planetary energies being sort of filtered through um the moon and
Hmm.
the phases of the moon and where it's at, and an astrologer could probably say better what the deal is there, but that's cool, that's interesting.
Yeah, and I oh man, I forgot what I was gonna say. I have so many thoughts
No,
circling
you're
in my
good.
head.
Yeah, I've had a bunch that like I'm like, damn, we're gonna have to come to that, and I'll remember them all once we're done talking, I'm sure.
Yeah, me too. The what is it? The French term, the spirit of the staircase, where you like realize like something awesome that you had, and like,
Yeah, the Costanza.
hmm.
The
But yeah,
old
I'm
George
really glad you
Costanza.
brought up. I'm really glad you brought up cosmology though, because like I just learned about Brahe's system like a week ago, and I'm like, oh my god, this sounds too crazy to share with any other human. I'm just gonna like sit on it until it explodes.
And
um,
it's interesting too, right? Because there's I'm pretty sure multiple things named after him. Like he's a very famous astronomer, but if you mentioned his theories, you would be called a flat earther probably or something by
yeah,
someone that doesn't know anything about them.
exactly. And
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 so
it's
it's
like
interesting. That's
it's one
called
of those
prejudice.
yeah, it's one of those don't look here things. It's
Yeah.
like but I just remembered I was going to say actually, because like talking about like a way out, it seems to me like every time, like because the empire has its narrative, like these are the important scientists, and there's the ones who discovered the true things, and like these are the guys that you have to listen to. If you look closer at each of them, you'll see like another option that was involved. Like Kepler was actually a student of Brahe, and there's rumors around that he might have poisoned him. Um, and Kepler actually took Brahe's work and changed a bunch of the calculations in it to make it fit his theories of how the universe works. Um,
Wow.
and the same thing happens with Darwin. Like Darwin was the person who discovered evolution by natural selection, but the second person who discovered it independently of Darwin was Alfred Russel Wallace. And in the 19th century, the theory of evolution was known as the Darwin-Wallace theory of evolution. And Wallace, he believed in evolution by natural selection, but he also believed that living systems had what he called innate intelligence. And he believed that like that was a major factor in evolution, was the innate intelligence of living systems. But he ended up spending the last part of his life researching psi phenomenon and life after death, and that got him almost kicked out of the Royal Academy. They're going to like strip him of his pension, but he was defended in court by Darwin himself. Um, so like, and then you look at like electricity. You have like Edison is the one that everyone knows, but Tesla was the one that was like I think closer to the truth. So it seems like there's like a syzygy, like every time you see like the kind of, if I could be courageous and say the bad option, there's like a good option right alongside it.
Oh, the idea of the syzygy is good because that just echoes back through time to the very foundations. I like it.
And
Um,
Gnostics, like the archons, each of the archons has a like, or the aeons are in syzygy with each other.
right. And so, what caused this predicament that we're in now in Gnosticism was Sophia emanating without her consort, without her syzygy.
Hmm.
So it's like this idea of sort of an imbalance being brought into the world.
And I think
Yes.
that's like in the story of Empire, because you have like this like string of scientists that are responsible for the material worldview. A lot of them were occultists. A lot of them like had very different ideas than what, like, because Newton discovers physics, but he actually considers alchemy more important,
Yeah, it
or
was
not
like his
discovered
side.
physics.
It was like his side project. Alchemy was his main thing.
Yep, and you don't hear about that in school. And his like Newton's family like kept that secret for like hundreds of years. Um, but yeah, like you get this story, but then you look at the story and you see that there's like another option at each point. Like there's another road that you can take. Uh, in microbiology, you have Pasteur and then Bouchard. I think his name is Bouchard, the terrain theorist guy. Like
Yeah.
you have that other road.
Yeah, which gives you a fuller picture. Like there's probably something of a synthesis involved that gets you close in
Hmm.
all of those, right? That gets you closer to the reality of it, if that is even constant.
Yeah, it's kind of like in the Corpus Hermeticum, like bring together in yourself all opposites of quality.
I like it. So yeah, that idea of a way out is a good thread. That's a good way for you to put it. Um so let me ask you this. What kind of things do you do? What praxis do you have in your life to kind of keep you from falling too deeply into the rabbit hole, if I can ask? Or do you?
I do. Yeah, I feel like uh well, I feel like the number one thing is to have an anchor somewhere, like in like a worldview sense or like a belief sense. Like have something that you are not going to let go of, that is like you think is good and beautiful and true. Because I think if you dive into conspiracy stuff with like a mostly like materialist worldview, I think you'll just get swallowed by it, because you'll look at these people who have all this money and all this power and all these crazy weapons that could destroy the planet however many times over, and you'll be like, wow, it's hopeless. Like I can't do anything against that. And in the materialist world, you couldn't, but that's not the world we live in. So I think the number one thing is to like realize that you live in a different worldview and different world than the one they're telling you that you do. And at least like that, this is what works for me anyway. Like I'm a really strong believer in that everybody has like a core identity, like a true self, and that core identity is good. And I think you could read that into a number of different religions. I would even read it into Buddhism to risk the anger from that sector. But yeah, I think that everybody has this connection to like goodness within themselves. And I think the way that you find that is you realize that a bunch of stuff in your head isn't really you. Like, everybody has thoughts, and you could read like Psy into this too. Like everybody has like thoughts and impressions and stuff like that that don't really come from them. And so I think it's the work of like realizing that, there is a true self that is good. And like, if these thoughts are like stressful or like, kind of limiting, or you can release them. Like there's a self that is totally released and totally free, and realizing that that's there already. And so I practice a lot of like meditation along those lines. And I also believe that like goodness is a real force in the world. And I think back to Lord of the Rings, like I think that's a really good guide for this time. Like one of the examples I always think of is in the Fellowship of the Ring, like Merry and Pippin like weren't supposed to be there. Like their presence in the Fellowship was an accident, or a quote unquote accident, and it was because they were there that Saruman didn't end up getting the ring. And this isn't really explained in the movies too much, I think, but they when the Uruk-hai kidnap Merry and Pippin, they thought they had the only two halflings because that's what the information that Sauron had. So he had a limited picture of the system. He said, there are two, get them, bring them here. and missed getting the actual ring. So that like quote unquote accident, the thing that like didn't go according to plan, like people being in the right place at the right time just by serendipity or providence or whatever you want to call it, um, derailed the bad guy's plans.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a really good. I never thought of that. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. Yeah, I like this because I think it's one of those situations in which the answer that comes is both. It's it turns out that the answer for how to keep myself sane is also the answer for what can I do about it. Like what? Okay,
Yes.
so how do I stay sane? But then also like what do I do about these things, right? And
Mm-hmm.
they're the same side of the same coin.
Oh, I love
For me,
that.
in a very similar way, it's like the practice of gratitude. Like, so if it even if it's difficult sometimes, I practice gratitude for these systems, for these beings, for um these a lot of the times terrible things that are happening in the world because um they're all in a way like teaching, or
Mm-hmm.
they had to have the experience of being so nasty, and I'm grateful that they took that on themselves, because I do believe in like the soul contract and stuff, but that's like a whole nother conversation. Like I think I mean to be here, and I think I'm here intentionally. But
Yeah.
that's another medicine. Like, and so that's not to me so much. People are like, yeah, but how can you know that? How can you believe that? And it's like really not as much a matter of belief as it is a practice, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I practice thinking that way, and it transforms my reality,
Yeah, it makes it like
or
because I feel
informs
like
maybe.
yeah, and that's beautiful. I love that. And it really connects back to materialism because like if you're a being that exists for no purpose, you came into existence randomly and life gets snuffed out at the end, like you're really not in a position to not be afraid. Like I think of that Lonely Island song, like YOLO, like you only live once, build a bomb shelter in your basement with titanium walls. Like
Yeah.
like if you realize that like you didn't begin with your birth and you don't end with your death, like you can loosen the grip a little bit. You can realize that like there are more forces at play than it's like Lord of the Rings again. Like there's more at work in the world besides the good of evil. And I think the good operates in very subtle ways, and it operates like more interpersonally than through these large systems.
Yeah. And it seems as though, like, it's interesting, right? Because I grew up, I know, being taught that like there's this benevolent God that's pulling all the strings to everything, and that God's will is what's guiding everything. But and this may just be my more Gnostic take on things now, but it's actually also very Lord of the Rings, like you're saying, where the the manifestation of the benefic spirits often um, shows itself through the actions of people, whereas
Yeah.
the more malefic are operating at this top-down level and at this very controlling, dominating level, and that's not doesn't seem to be a coincidence, right?
Yeah, and it's kind of like with I love that. It's like with Elrond, like he when he sends the fellowship off, he doesn't lay an oath on, like no oath binds you. And then
Nice.
the syzygy of that, or maybe that's the wrong word, but the counterpart of that is like one ring to in the darkness to bind them. So
Oh
there's
man, yeah, and that's why they were, because they chose a fellowship of nine because they were nine riders, right? Like
mhm,
nine for nine. Oh, it's
yep.
so good. It's so
It's
good.
just like mind-blowingly awesome at every term.
Yeah.
And
And there's also the one of these little details that I love so much that's like not talked about in the book at all. Well, it is, but you have to be like deep in the lore to even hear them talking about it, right? It's one of those things where like there's multiple things going on at every passage of that book. But the ring that Gandalf wears is the ring. I believe it's Narya, the fire ring,
I forgot which one he has.
and they call it the Kindler. And it
Oh,
basically gives the bearer the ability to like start these groundswell movements in people, to like inspire people to be. And so that you see
oh,
Gandalf doing that, like he's riding around like kindling the fires, and you see
hmm
it kind of literally in the beacon fires, right? But
yeah. Oh, yeah.
yeah,
Oh, that's so cool. Yeah, it definitely would be fire then. And it's like, and yeah, finding like that interpersonal level, like the people that no one would expect would have these like enormous impacts on the world.
yes, they're doing it um at the ground level. I don't know what you call it, right? Like the that might be too mundane of a. I like Gordon White's at the level of the field is good.
hmm
Yeah.
Because I feel like because if you're operating in that materialist worldview, like the answer to evil people doing evil things is I'm going to make an organization and we're going to get a lot of money and we're going to take it to them or something, or we're going to vote someone in or something like that. And if you play that game, I feel like on that, based on that metaphysics, you're going to end up in the exact same place that the people in charge are right now.
Yep. You're just building another vessel to be filled with that being, whatever it is. It's the Philip K. Dick thing that I always come back to this. It's just like seems to be just true at a baseline level. Is, you know, to fight the empire or to seek to defeat it is to become deranged by its madness. Or I'm misquoting, but it's great.
Yeah, and that's another thing I wanted to talk about, like what the archons are, and
Ooh,
I
yeah.
tend to,
Before we do that, can I pee real quick?
yeah, yeah, sure. Let's say take a quick break.
Yeah, let's take a quick break and then we'll get into that because this is good shit. Okay, cool. I'll be right
Yep,
back.
it's awesome. Be right back, back and ready to go.
Yeah, I actually remembered while I was peeing that when Gandalf is facing the Balrog in Moria, what he says is actually a reference to that ring. He says, I'm a servant of the secret fire, a wielder of the flame of Arnor, a servant of the secret fire. Like, well, that's a reference to Iluvatar, right? But the flame of Arnor is the
hmm
ring. And this idea that of the secret fire is is really important to me. The Gnostics would call it the divine spark, uh, and that's it can't be seen. It's invisible. It's within. So what is visible seems to be the archons. Not that everything visible is an archon, but
hmm
the archons are incredibly visible. They're very out,
hmm
even if though they are a bit secretive. Their influence is out in the open. So let's talk a little bit about the archons. What are what like
That's
the hypostasis of the archons, right? What are they?
that's brilliant. So this is kind of like my personal take on the archons. I feel like they are so I kind of subscribe to the idea that every energy is a person and every person is an energy. And I kind of think that archons, like as persons, as these kind of beings, are like a. I don't want to use personification because that implies that I'm like attributing personhood to the something that doesn't have it. But I think they are the persons of our like collective belief systems. Um,
Mm.
so so like in Catholic Europe, in the Middle Ages, like the archon is God the Father of the Catholic Church, and it's kind of this like um, so the archons are kind of in us and in society at the same time, like as within, as without. Like they're kind of these belief structures that a lot of people hold at the same time, that are alive somehow. That's what I think they are, and I think that's why it's so hard or impossible to like beat them at their own game, because they literally are that thing. Like they literally are the power structure. So if you like enter into that power structure, like, I'm going to make a environmental NGO and we're going to save the world, like you're entering into that belief system. And so you're on their territory and there's nothing that you can do but succumb to that belief system.
Yeah, consensus reality, and therefore, like a very real aspect of reality is made of them. They're the, you know, like Abraxas is the very fabric of the cosmos, right?
Hmm.
And I think it's also useful for me nowadays, especially to see them as not like fundamentally evil, right? Um,
Hmm.
but like blind. And then,
Hmm.
there are parts in certain Gnostic texts too where they're redeemed. For instance, Sabaoth in I don't even remember which one it is. It might be the Secret Book of John or the Hypostasis of the Archons. I can't remember which. Um, where Sabaoth actually sees what's going on and is like, "No, I'm not doing this." Like, and like rebels and joins the side um of the Aeons, right? And
Hmm.
so yeah, they're like, and and that's just useful for me because it's so easy to like then do the same thing. It's easy to fall in the trap of projection if I'm
Hmm.
doing like living in this black and white binary, even with something like an archon, right? Like, and I think a lot of the times, they do present as evil, but I think only so much as, and that's a really astute point that you made about them being kind of inside us and outside of us at the same time, because I think they are a reflection. And I think in a lot
Hmm.
of ways we are the archons. Um,
Hmm. Like they kind of seem to be this energy of like collective human movements or beliefs. Like I think the archon of China might be different from the archon of the US, or whatever country you want to do, but like what they share is that they have this power structure that like enough people give energy to for it to sustain itself.
yeah, they work through that
And one
mythopoesis.
Yeah, and I one of the really big things that I like, so I grew up progressive, and I don't even know what to call myself now. Like I'm not a conservative. Like what am I conserving? Like what is there to conserve?
Yeah.
Um,
And
but
I don't see eye to eye with them either. I'm like one of the ants. I'm
yeah,
on no side because no one is on my side.
yeah, that's how I feel too. And but when I was a progressive, I was like, I had this like very idealistic understanding of what the government is. Like I was like, oh, the government is the thing that comes in and fixes everything and doesn't need money because it like has all the money. And I kind of realized through direct engagement with it that like the government, just like any other organization that humans create, attempts to sustain and expand itself. Just like a corporation, just like a religion, like just like all of these things, like they have a kind of life force that they attempt to perpetuate. And it's kind of like, when everyone is a member of a company, like, in your role as a member of that company, you help to try and like perpetuate the existence of that organization. And you
Yeah,
follow
so it's
its
like an
rules and all
egregore.
that kind of thing. Hmm.
So that being said, I do, and this might be the exception that proves the rule, if that even is a sensical um, turn of phrase. I never even quite really understood it, but um, as a paradox, it works. That being said, there is this particular archon right now that seems to be even beyond any of that. Or I'm probably
Hmm.
not putting this right. Like it's something, and I don't know if it's like a tech archon or what it is, but it's just like I see it as this just, it's like the nothing from Neverending Story.
Hmm.
It's like this grayness that wants to subsume everything, and it's particularly nasty, I think. And I said this on my last episode, and I'll say it again now, but I think that these our current woes are the expression of like something that's being purged from our world,
Hmm.
as something that's like
Yeah.
the expression of something leaving the world. It's like an immune response of the world against this thing that just doesn't belong anymore. And that's like what this
Hmm.
archon is. Now, how long that's going to take, I don't know. But that's my optimistic take on it. Um, what do you? We've talked about this some, but yeah, if you do, you want to take that ball and run with it, or what do you think on that?
Yeah, I can totally. Yeah, I am. I feel like I've encountered this being before, and I am. It actually happened several years before 2020. I think when I'd like kind of backdate this, like I was like, oh, that was that. Um, I dreamed I this had to be like 2012. I don't remember the year, but I dreamed I was in this like techno realm where everything was dead and thin and like had no depth to it and was just like and I felt this presence, this like horrible, horrible evil that wanted to make the entire world like this. So I know exactly what you're talking about. And I think I it feels like a she to me. Um have you seen the movie I, Robot?
Yeah, I've read the story too.
Yeah, the Vicky at the end. That's how I picture her.
Mm.
She's like, you are so like children and you need to be taken care of, and I will make everything nice for you.
Yeah, there's
Um,
definitely that. Like, I'm protecting you from this ickiness of life, this ickiness of incarnation. Like, you don't have to. Yeah, there's definitely a sense of that there. Like, you won't have to hurt anymore. You won't have to
mhm.
be dirty anymore. And
Yep,
in
you'll
that
just be in
way, it's
your
like almost this like it's doing it for your own good.
mhm, the devouring mother.
Yeah. I also think
And I
about it.
think it's
Go ahead. Go ahead.
oh, it's all right. No, go ahead.
No, I'm going to form my thought while you continue speaking.
I I feel like this archon, the archon of this age is like different than any prior one. Like it definitely doesn't seem like the kind of like it's something totally maybe not totally new, but very new. This kind of like pacification instead of like dominance and domineering violence. It's this kind of pacifying violence. It's like we're going to
Yeah.
make everything nice and calm and no one will ever be mean again and like you'll be safe with me.
And
Like
it's more
yeah, it's
horrifying.
the
Like, what we're seeing now is how a war is fought under that paradigm of pacifying
mm-hmm,
violence. That's a really good way to put it. So all the war, like I'm one of those people that thinks that we like, oh, everyone's like, when's World War III? Like you're in it. It's happening now. It's already
yep,
going on. And how it works
mm-hmm,
is it's not open violence. It's all this under the surface stuff. It's like
mm-hmm,
clandestine attacks on energy things, cyber attacks, biomedical interventions, chemical warfare, opium war stuff, like which in a way it's like this thing can't help itself and it's making it so much worse to where it's like it's going to collapse everything.
yeah. And I think it's interesting that the way people talk, going back to AI, like the way this thing feels very technological, very cyber
Yeah.
to me. And the way people talk about like the potential of AI, like the kind of singularity people, they're like, oh, it'll be able to bring people back from the dead. Like Ray Kurzweil says that he expects to resurrect his dead father using this technology and live forever and all that stuff. Like the all the promises that the AI community or whatever you want to call it movement makes are making the same promises that God makes. Like you'll be
Oh
satisfied
yeah.
forever, you will live forever, you will have whatever you want. Um, like I think that's the best way that you can tell that this thing is an archon is it claims to be the final unity at the end of time.
Yeah. Oh my
But that
gosh.
title
Yeah.
belongs to
There's
the one
no other
alone.
before me.
Hmm.
There,
And
that's
it's
very Yaldabaoth.
there's a thing too. Like there's a God. I forget the actual name of it, but there's this like theory floating around the internet that like an AI that is sufficiently advanced enough would be able to orchestrate history to create itself. And I'm like,
Oh yeah,
that's a
like Roku's
theological claim.
basilisk. Have you
Hmm.
heard that one? Roku's
I think
basilisk,
that's it. If
and that AI would punish
remind me
anyone.
though.
Like that AI would like scour through time, punishing anyone that spoke against it. So just by me telling you that it exists and you not doing anything about it, I've just put a curse on you. So now you have to propagate the AI. I think
Hmm.
that like luckily none of that works. I think
It doesn't. Yeah.
it's all based on, and even the resurrection thing, it's all based on the flawed supposition that a one-to-one facsimile is that thing by a
Yeah.
law of transmission or something, right? Which is just not true.
Yep.
Like if I built, like it's like the whole lab grown meat thing. Like I guarantee you it's
Hmm.
not the same thing.
Hmm. Yeah. It has no spark in it, and yeah, going back to like yeah, with the AI,
Ooh.
like it I don't think it can really exist here. Like I think it wants to, like I think it wants to like take all this three-dimensional reality and crush it down to two-dimensional, but it's like a fundamental, it's like oil and
Well,
water. It
I
just
think it
doesn't
can't exist
mix.
here for that reason. I think that's the exact reason that it can't exist here because it wants to be able to create that one-to-one facsimile, and if it can just copy it perfectly, it'll be the
Hmm.
same thing. Um, this is a
Hmm.
very archonic mindset, and this is actually also in the Gnostic texts and the hypostasis of the archons. Um, the archons look up into the sky, and above they see an image reflecting down into the water, and that image above is the pleroma, and they see a being,
Hmm.
and they say, let us create a being like this, and they actually say, let us create this being so that we can lure that being up there down here, and then fuck it. But we're gonna, it's obviously like working at the level of metaphor, so maybe not exactly, but maybe
Yeah.
they did want to as well.
Hmm.
So what they do is they create this facsimile of an aeon, and it's like an anthropomorphic human, but it doesn't have the spark in it. So it just like flops around on the ground, like kind of like how you'd imagine like a malfunctioning android in like a Ridley Scott movie, right? Like it's it's
Yep.
writhing and around on the ground with no life. Now, Sophia or Zoe or whoever, whatever you want to call her, she actually sneaks the divine spark. This is my read on it, but she sneaks the divine
Hmm.
spark into this being in order to trick the aeons into giving a shit about this world. Um,
Hmm.
that may be a tangent, but it's again that idea of like if we can just make an exact copy, then it will have the spark. Um,
I think that's a great read too.
hey, my elevator pitch for Gnosticism is time traveling cum angels.
Yep. Yeah, that's that's perfect.
Uh,
I um and and you bring up like Sophia and Zoe, and I think there's a like the kind of inversions we're talking about, or like the syzygies, the pairing. I think this current archon is the inversion of Mary or Sophia. Like
the Dark
and I
Sophia.
think about Mary, yeah, because Mary and I think more closer to like Orthodox Christianity for this like mythos, because I think about Mary bearing Christ, or like the divine spark, like the divine individual, this like God person, and she is present for the crucifixion. And so there's a sense of with Mary that she, and that isn't really talked about in the Christian tradition much, the pain of, I mean, I guess maybe it was at one point, like there used to be very commonly made statues of the Pieta, which is the Virgin Mary holding the body of Christ. Um, but there's this sense that like she is also a mother, but she kind of lets Christ fulfill this divine mission. Not like lets him, but like accepts that he has a divine mission to fulfill and is present for it and is caring, but like doesn't try to smother or prevent him from doing it.
You know what's interesting? Just my mind started like racing as you mentioned that, and hmm, let me try to put words to what I'm thinking. If 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 in some ways, since this dark manifestation of Mary or Sophia is in a way birthing like a consciousness shift, a shift in the paradigm, is in a way bringing forth this new heaven and new earth because it's waking us up to the new possibilities, then in some way she is still doing that. She is doing, like, she's allowing us to, and I don't know, we're gonna have to like work on that, because that's, man, I'm getting chills just thinking about it.
I think you're totally onto something, because it's like it's almost like the photographic negative. Like it's this like bringing into the world of the divine spark in a, I don't want to say like negative way, but like in a kind of like
Well, it's
in
an
a
Aquarius
distorted
way.
reflection.
It's an age of
Yeah,
Aquarius
yeah,
way.
totally.
Whereas Christ was God embodied in one, this would be God embodied in the collective. The
Hmm.
that kingdom of heaven being within you. And so her
Hmm.
being an arbiter for that would be, that's some interesting stuff. And this is another good way that that I like to, this is another way that I like to combat the archons, and not combat them, right? Because again, you're falling into the trap. But this is the medicine for the archons for me, is trying to this is building that heart for Ahriman, like thinking about it in a way that, like, situating it within the greater myth or the greater story. It's somehow like it's offering that being a place, and by doing that you sort of disarm them because they're no longer like from outside.
Hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think that yeah, I and it goes back to what you're saying about like the archons not being totally evil. Like I guess I tend to, I like Gnosticism a lot, and I kind of fall back on like the Platonist Hermeticist idea more, like in the final analysis, all things serve the good.
Yeah.
Or so I think that there's like two ways of looking at it. There's the like very embodied, like I am facing this type of way, where there's this like opposition, and like this is like something totally separate from me, imposed on me from without. And then and you can hold that belief at the same time as you're like seeing that it is actually a part of creation, and like
Yeah.
you're in relation to it, and like you're implicated in it and it's implicated in you. And
Yeah. We're here now. We're
um
here with it.
mhm. And I feel like that's God, I wish C.S. Lewis of all people had a really good quote on this, but he had this observation that like at any period in history, like the people, because there's arguments at everywhere down the timeline, like there's always someone arguing about something. And he pointed out that the two sides arguing had a lot more in common with each other than they do with any people before or after them. Like I think about in the Roman Empire when they were arguing about like Christological heresies, and like who Christ was, and they got into like allegedly got into fist fights about adoptionism versus like the pre-existence of the logos. And it's like that argument make no sense to anybody right now, but
Yeah.
people
Right.
came to blows and violence in the
Yeah. And
past. Like,
eventually that was like a blood sport, right? Like people were getting tortured to
yep.
death over this stuff. Um, but they're still arguing about Christ. They're still
Hmm.
talking about Jesus. They're still both Christians. Like that's the funny part, right?
Yep.
And I can actually do this myself. And this is an interesting, because this takes us back to the archons, and it's an interesting microcosm. And it works in the hermetic stuff, right? Of as above, so below, the macrocosm mirroring the microcosm and vice versa. Um, is this idea that when I'm in my life, if I'm trying like to struggle against something, it often just like takes my surrender to become free from it. Whereas if I'm fighting it actively, I'm still thinking about the thing. So for in my life, the example for that would be like, let's take alcohol, for instance. When I was trying to be sober, I was still thinking about drinking because I was trying not to drink. But the moment I stopped doing that was the moment I became free, and I haven't had a drink since. Now, this it's not just about that. It can be about anything. I think that works. That works in my life with in many areas. Certain people don't have a problem with that. They might have a problem with something else. I think it's a similar tactic, and it works in a similar way to the archons, right? This dude, it's the flower and the gun. It is
Hmm.
it is in my opinion like the response that this time calls for to these things is
Hmm.
and surrender might not even be a good word for it, but it serves well
I,
enough for that example.
I like being with, or like,
Yeah.
um, yeah, and I feel like we were talking about like all the dis or discrediting by association that the kind of powers that be do. I think the states of consciousness that work the best for them is like this fearful, angry, like kind of like you're not thinking too clearly.
Yeah.
And this might be just like me inventing neuroscience on the spot, so it could be totally
Please
wrong,
do
but
it.
uh, um, when fear is present, like you lose those higher order functions. Like
Absolutely.
you're not, yeah, you're like not able to do the second and third order processing. Like you're very focused on the now, and like if your goal is to manipulate somebody to serve your agenda or like whatever you've got going on, that's the state you want them in. You don't want them thinking 2 and 3 steps out of like what you're doing, because then they might not go along with it.
Yeah. The opposite of fear is not courage. It's it's something I don't have the end of that. But
It's
like
like repose, maybe. I don't know.
yeah, it really may be freedom. Like freedom and fear might exist if there is a spectrum that you could like for the sake of simplicity, right? Like I'm not free when I'm and I can experience fear and be with fear, like you're saying, be with. I can be with fear and not be run by it. Um, but when I am kind of operating under that, it's more of like a when that's habitual for me or when that's a compulsion for me, that's when I'm in danger.
Yeah, I've struggled with that a lot myself too. I am like I've spent a long time trying to like fight away the fears. Like I'm gonna overcome this fear through like superior force. But what that ended up doing is just pushing the fear deeper down
It's the same thing we're
and
talking about.
entrenching.
Well, and
Hmm.
and what is the litany against fear? I will let the fear pass over me and through me or something like that. I'm going to misquote it, right? But
I forgot. That's great stuff though.
the fear, dude, it doesn't exist right now. Like it's a it's a fugazi, it's an illusion, it's a construct, you know?
And I feel like we're talking about like cyber stuff and like social media, like I feel like there is a part of fear that is like a survival mechanism.
Yeah.
Like take like a cat, for example. Like if the cat like hears a loud noise, it's gonna like turn its head, pick up its ears, and like, be alert. Um, and then once the noise passes, like usually the cat will just kind of calm down and nap, or like, bad at like dust motes in the in the air.
Right, do catch
Uh,
it.
and I feel like with yeah, and I feel like with like human beings, like we have that sense of like alertness, like we have that like, survival reflex, like the quote unquote like reptilian brain, and like we're gonna respond to this. But I feel like that gets turned on all the time and it doesn't get turned off. Like, especially because people are like so plugged in all the time to industries that profit off their fear.
Yeah.
Like you just end up being in fear all the time and it never turns off. Like I think it's this displacement of that survival reflex into a constant fear that's like plaguing so many people.
Yeah, like you said, it makes us very easy to control and manipulate. I just think it's yeah, I just think that the less I have it in my life, like those higher functions and not even just on like a neurological level, but like higher functions is in like I can plug into other ways of knowing. I can plug into other ways of experiencing myself. I can plug into other ways of experiencing the world, and I can interface with beings in a much easier way if I'm able to kind of calm that fear. And a lot of the time it's coincident with thought.
One of my favorite writers on the kind of like challenges we're facing right now is Gene Gepser. He came up with like the theory, or not maybe not theory, but like the idea of integral consciousness. And he says like at the moment before integral consciousness will come about, there'll be like a moment of like total anxiety, like anxiety coming from every direction. And that feels very much like the present moment for so many people. Like fear is just overwhelmingly present. But he said that the way you go into the new mode of consciousness, this like closer to the divine mode of consciousness, is through what he called primal trust. So like you just kind of trust whatever comes,
That is
like
good.
that
And
you're in
that's
relationship.
okay. That gives a much better word than surrender is trust.
Mm-hmm.
Trust is the opposite of fear. Okay. That's good.
And it's a hard thing to do. Like I've tried it, and it's like it's hard because I'm like, oh my god, these psychopaths are in charge of the government, and
Yeah.
like these planetary crises, and like the world's going to end 6 ways in on Sunday. Like
Yeah.
it's but it brings back to that immediacy. Like when you're in that like really big state of mind, like these big titanic systems like clashing, like there's really no room for the individual. There's like no room for that intimate experience. But like if you just kind of like sit down on a bench and like just kind of like trust whatever thoughts, whatever sensations, like what inner or outer experience comes to you, and just kind of go with it. Like I think you realize that you live in that living universe, like where the stars are alive, and that all things eventually work for good.
Yeah, and everything is okay. Like there's a level at which all is well. And this is like the kind of stuff angels
Mhm.
tell you, right? Like if you call them up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and it's kind of frustrating sometimes too, because they're like, oh yeah, you'll be fine, like it doesn't feel like it right now, and they're like, yeah, whatever. It doesn't.
Dude, they're like that's like oh my gosh, it's so funny. I'm gonna keep going back to the recovery analogy, but like they're very much like these cosmic sponsors. When I was like first in my first early sobriety, um, I would call my sponsor and be like, "Man, I'm freaking out. Like this isn't going right. Nothing's going right. I've got this going on. Like what's gonna happen, dude? Like I'm freaking out, man. I'm freaking out." And he'd be like, "Look, chill out, sit down, and think right now. Is anything immediately affecting your well-being? Like, is there actually someone coming in the door trying to stab you? Is the is the roof caving in? Like, are you in a place where you're able to sit and breathe?" And he was right. And that to me is like the same thing that I like the same thing that keeps me sane today is just recognizing that like I'm okay. And there are times when that isn't the case. And somehow that also helps me in those times too. Right. Because like in the end, I think it comes back to this like the 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 eternal nature of the some part that's within me, right? Like the eternal nature of the divine spark that dwells within me, or the eternal nature of my being or my consciousness, or even just experience, right? If I'm able to tap into that, then I do become like unassailable. Like nothing can hurt me.
That's how I view it too. Like I really think it's that the process, or like in my experience, or like my understanding, like there's a great line in the Bhagavad Gita where Krishna, the two armies are arrayed on the field of battle, and Arjuna experiences a crisis of faith, and he's like, how can I see, great people arrayed on both sides? Like, how can I possibly kill these people? Like, how can I possibly fight them? And Krishna tells him, like, never was there a time when I was not, and never in the future will I cease to be, nor nor any of these arrayed on the field. Field metaphor. And I think that's really like the key is like it's this will be a good this will be a good thing for me to end with. I think end on a really positive note.
Yeah.
So I one time I spent a week. I was in a really rough part of my life, and I spent a week like just kind of thinking about the line. Like I wasn't really like meditating or anything. I was just thinking about it. Like you are one with the all in a timeless, eternal, and infinite sense. And this hasn't happened to me before or since, but I had to like pick someone up from the airport the next morning, and like I drove out there, and I drove back in like this sudden state of bliss, like this inexplicable thing. Like I hadn't taken anything. I was completely sober. I was driving, like the sun was hitting the city in the morning. I was just like had this intellectual realization that like maybe not an intellectual realization, but like this deep knowing that everyone and everything eventually comes to eternal joy. And like that isn't scary in any way whatsoever. Like I had this sense of eternity as something that like you couldn't be afraid of. Like because a lot of people think about eternity, they're like, oh, I'm going to be stuck forever. And I had this deep sense that if you look at it that way, you haven't understood it. And I fell out of that state like later in that afternoon, and
Sure.
but it stuck with me ever since. Like it's the phrase that comes to mind, however silly it is like the party never stops. Like it's just kind of joy all the way.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you so much for coming on. I've had a great time talking to you, man.
Me too. This was awesome. If you ever want to invite me back, let me know.
No,
I would love
please, man,
because
there are like multiple threads that I didn't even hit on that, like, well, yeah, we'll definitely do it again, man. Thank you so much.
Sounds good. I'm going to send you that information on Tycho Brahe.
Oh yeah, please do. And maybe I can link it too.
Have a good one.
You too. Do you experience weird shit? Do your parents not like to tell their friends about what you do in the woods? Do you make more friends in a graveyard than you do at a party populated by living humans? Do you have interactions with beings that are not strictly considered human? Do other people look at you like you're crazy when you mention talking to trees in casual conversation? If you fist pumped or even just answered yes to any of these questions, you may be a Nightbird. So let's sing together. If you'd like to come on the show and flap your gums with me, share your stories, or just talk about the malleable nature of reality for a while, then send me an email at tim@nightbirdpodcast.com. That's tim@nightbirdpodcast.com. I'd love to have you on the show. But until then, I gotta fly. But before I go, let me say this. Remember, you are never alone. I believe you.